the Viltrox AF 35mm F1.8 Z Lens. Now recently, Viltrox got in touch with me and they sent me out this 35mm version that they make. And they said, hey, test it out on the Nikon Z7 and see what you think. So, how does it perform? Let's go and find out. So a little disclaimer before I begin this video. Viltrox aren't paying me to do this video in any sort of way. So any sort of findings or opinions I've got of this lens are mine alone. The lens comes well packaged, and inside you get front and rear lens caps, obviously the 35mm F1.8 Z lens itself, a lens hood and a lens pouch. My initial impressions of the lens was that it was well built and had a good solid feel. The Viltrox weighs in at 370 grams, or a bit over 13 ounces. Has a 55mm filter thread, an aperture range of f1.8 to f16, and is constructed of 10 elements in 8 groups, including 2 extra low dispersion elements, 2 aspherical elements, and 2 high refraction index elements. It uses a 9-blade aperture diaphragm and has a minimum focusing distance of 40 centimeters. So this is a full frame or an FX lens. It's meant to go on your full frame Nikon cameras like your Z5s and your Z6 and your Z7s. You can certainly use it on things like the Nikon ZFC and the Z50, but the thing is, you'll have to take into account that's going to turn the focal length into a 52.5mm focal length because of the 1.5 crop. Those people that own those cameras also will realise you don't get any sort of image stabilisation. Here in Australia, the lens retails for approximately $550. In the US, approximately $400. That's under half the price of the Nikon 35mm f1.8 S lens. The Viltrox is chipped for transferring EXIF data and includes autofocus. It's driven by a stepping motor mechanism, which is silent in stills and video, and importantly, supports Nikon's IAF technology. It also has a physical aperture ring on the outside of the lens, but you can still control the aperture settings from the camera with the aperture ring set in the auto position. Plus, you have a manual focus ring for when you want that little bit more creative flexibility. So I found shooting with the Viltrox wide open at f1.8, they aren't really the sharpest shots I've got from a prime lens. However, when I drop the aperture back to something like f2.8, the images do increase in sharpness quite substantially. There are some easy workarounds in achieving sharper results via post-processing, as most of you know. For example, programs such as Topaz Labs, Luminar, Adobe Lightroom, and Photoshop can all add more clarity, sharpness, and reduction in noise. It's not a perfect solution, but you do end up with more polished images overall than those straight out of the camera at f1.8. As with most of its recent lenses, Viltrox has included a built-in USB-C port on the rear mount for updating the lens's firmware, a nice future-proof feature. The updating process is pretty easy via your PC or laptop by visiting the Viltrox website and finding the latest firmware you need, downloading and simply dragging onto your lens. Unlike the Nikon 35mm f1.8 S lens, the Viltrox is not weather sealed. So if you're thinking about doing a lot of shooting out in damp environments or are continually out in the rain or snow, then it might be wise to take precautions in buying a weather cover for that little bit of added protection. So a little summation when it comes to the Viltrox AF 35mm f1.8 Z lens. I think the main thing you have to remember is that this is a budget lens. You shouldn't expect the same type of performance from its more expensive Nikon counterpart, but in a lot of aspects, it's very close. At the end of the day, the money you save from buying the Viltrox 35mm you can put towards another lens, or maybe even buy some accessories for your camera. I found the focusing was quick and responsive, and all up in the 2 weeks I tested this lens, I was able to capture some pleasing images in both stills and video. Given its low price point, the lens performed how I expected, but on a whole, it's relatively good value for money. Personally, I loved using this lens for video. Having that f1.8 aperture gives you more options in low light, and with that beautiful bokeh in the background, the shots look pretty awesome. Well guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the review. I've left a link in the description box below so you can check out more information about the Viltrox lens. As I always say, never stop creating, and I'll see you next time.